nothing to do with Florida, but these are the keys. Ki Teitze last week, Ki Tavo this week. And they are very different parshiot. Last week I mentioned that the theme of Ki Teitze, as expressed in its very title, that Moshe Rabbeinu, who is addressing a new generation about to enter the land of Israel, a very different place from the desert, is saying, Ki Teitze, when you will go out into the real world, this is not the bubble of the desert. Things are going to happen to you out there in the real world that you better be prepared for. And that's why there were 74 mitzvot in last week's Parsha that talked about all kinds of things, some pleasant, about kindness to others and how we are able to help one another, and some not so pleasant, talking about rape and talking about crime and things that, you know, a generation of the desert never experienced. Well, this week, it's a very, very different kind of climate as Moshe, again, continues his last words to the Jewish people before he dies in Ki Tavo. So last week was Ki Teitze, about going out into the world at large and experiencing all the things that every human being experiences. But Ki Tavo is more, as its name indicates, when you go in, this is more inner directed. This is more talking about the Jewish people as a nation and how we are to conduct ourselves in a unique fashion and what the consequences are if we don't. So there are very few mitzvot in this week's Parsha because it's talking in a very kind of intimate situation and setting. Moshe is talking to his people. These are my people. And I also want to mention that it's important that this Parsha is always read prior to Rosh Hashanah, prior to the Yamim Noraim, because there is a very crucial message that's kind of in a way hidden within this week's Parsha, and it's talking about the essence of tshuva, which is really, of course, the centerpiece of the Yamim Noraim, from Rosh Chodesh Elul, the 40 days of transformation, until the end of Yom Kippur on 10 Tishrei, when we are to undergo this transformation that always is encapsulated within a 40-day period. 40 days of the Moshe being on the mountain, 40 days of the flood, etc., and many more examples. But the centerpiece is tshuva, coming back to the pristine state that we have when we're born, when we're innocent, and that we had when we were in the Garden of Eden, when we were also innocent of any sin. And the key, again, without belaboring the story of the keys, but the key to tshuva is the way in which we return to Hashem, the type of tshuva. And this parsha deals with the two kind of, some would say complementary, some would say opposite methods of tshuva. One is tshuva, and we all, I think, know about this, tshuva me'yira, tshuva me'ahava. You can approach God and return to God because you're scared, because you're in awe of God, but in a sense, fearing God, or you can return out of love. These are the two methods. And as the Gemara in Yuma tells us very, very succinctly, there's a big difference between them. When you return to God out of fear, the tshuva is accepted, and your more serious crimes, sins, zdonot, they turn into shkogot, sins which are accounted to be, you didn't know any better. But when you do tshuva me'ahava, then those donot miraculously become zchuyot. They're not just excused or lessened, they actually become in your favor. They become something on your side. We're gonna have another share at some time coming up in the next week or so, talking about the dynamic of why this is so and what love can accomplish. But these are the two types of tshuva that Moshe is talking to his people, and he's really kind of giving them both the carrot and the stick. It's going to begin on a very positive note. Tavo is going to begin with the story of Bikurim, where the farmer comes and he expresses his gratitude and appreciation and love for Hashem because he has miraculously been taken on a historical level from a slave at the bottom rung of the social order to an independent farmer, a person who is master, in a sense, on a material level of his own fate. He grows things. He lives off of his own land. He's given his own piece of land. And it's a wonderful feeling. And he has this moment where he can bring these first fruits. He can, if you look in the Parsha sheet, I have a little bit about how little you really have to bring as first fruits, which is an interesting idea, even one grape. But he's going to come and express his Hakarat HaTov in this little soliloquy that we're familiar with from the Haggadah. We know this because this whole story is kind of repeated in the Haggadah with this famous phrase, Arami Oved Avi, which has many different translations, one of them being a wandering Aramean was my father. In other words, Yaakov came from Aram. The family came from Aram, and ultimately would go through this process, what we call the Kur HaBarzel, the iron furnace of Egypt. Slavery would lead to redemption. Ultimately, redemption would lead to our own land, where we could be, as I said, in a sense, from a material point of view, masters of our own fate. And he's going to express this tremendous appreciation and love for Hashem with this beautiful ceremony of Bikurim. And it's capped off with this phrase, V'samachta b'chol hatov, asher natan lecha Hashem elokecha uleveitecha, you will rejoice in all the good that Hashem has done for you. And the concept of the approaching God through joy, through love, through appreciation, this Hakarat HaTov, which, by the way, is and the reason why we put this in the Haggadah is because the central theme of Pesach is indeed Hakarat HaTov. When if you want to know what Pesach's all about, it's all about appreciating God. And that's one of the primary midot of a Jew, to appreciate what you have. That's the whole essence of this wild song of Dayenu, that at every step of the way, because this song that makes no sense, that if God would have taken us, out of Egypt, but not allowed us to cross the Red Sea, it would have been enough. But of course, it really wouldn't have been enough if we would have drowned in the Red Sea. But the point is, at every step of the way, you have to have Hakarat HaTov. You have to appreciate Hashem. That's what Pesach's all about. And this is not a share on Pesach, but you could go through the Haggadah, you'll see it at every page. And this is what the farmer is expressing as well, this Hakarat HaTov. So it uses the same language and the same text that's going to be in the Haggadah. And that's indeed how we will end the Sedra. We'll come back at the very end of Tavo in the last 8 psukim again to talk about, how wonderful it can be to fulfill Hashem's mitzvot and to be rewarded with wonderful things that God gives us, that Hashem will protect us, and we will defeat our enemies, and everything will work out for us. Those are the bookends of Tavo. But in the middle, we know, lies the specter of the Tochacha, this very, very graphic and frightening curse or list of curses that come upon the Jewish people when we don't follow Hashem. This is the other side of tshuva. This is the yira, the fear, and it is indeed frightening. The 53 psukim, no less, that are devoted to all the terrible things that can or maybe has happened to us in our history because we did not follow Hashem. And some of them are, you shudder to even read this to your children, and not just, the idea of being brought low by the other nations and conquered and suffering from starvation and poverty, but to the extent that you're so starving you have to eat your own children, and that you are scattered. That in the morning you say, "If only it were night," in the night you say, "If only it were morning." You are really just overcome by this tremendous sense of desolation and abandonment by God. And so that's the other side that Moshe is saying, that you have a lot to fear if you don't do tshuva, just as you have a lot to gain and a lot to look forward to if you do tshuva, especially from love. So both of these sides are being presented. And right in the middle of this tochacha, of these curses, there comes this phrase that, the Torah doesn't always explain why all these things are happening. The Torah is not meant for dummies, but for intelligent people to figure it out. But here we are told, specifically in Perik Chavchet, Pasuk, beginning with Pasuk Mem Hey, that all this happens to us, not so much because we didn't follow the mitzvot. Tachat asher lo avadat Hashem Elokecha b'simcha u'v'tov levav. That maybe, Merov Kol, maybe you may have by rote even done the mitzvot, but you didn't appreciate it. You didn't have a sense of love and of hakarat hatov. You didn't grasp the bigger picture, that look what an amazing God we have and a lifestyle that he's given us. You didn't approach the mitzvot from a sense of joy and a sense of appreciation. Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha. That's not really written anywhere in the Torah. We say it in the davening, but the concept is crucial to understand why we are doing this and what is the end game. The end game is always to appreciate God for what he gives us and approach God of your own initiative from a sense of, I understand what a wonderful religion this is and what it does for me and what you, God, do for me. But this is coupled with a very caustic phrase that is the other side of the coin. In the same parak, a little bit later in Pasuk Samach Gimel, and it's almost hard to say this pasuk, such that the rabbis try to interpret it different from its actual simple meaning. The pasuk says, "Vayer kasher sas Hashem alechem leitiv u'larbot etchem," just as God rejoices in doing for you, in doing good for you, and multiplying you, Kain yasis Hashem alechem lavid etchem u'lashmid etchem, so will God rejoice to destroy you. Now, this is very hard for us to imagine a God that is happy about destroying us. We assume that God sympathizes with us. And that's why the commentaries try to explain, no, it doesn't mean that God will rejoice at your destruction, but that the nations will rejoice at your destruction. But it's very caustic. And I think Moshe Rabbeinu is trying to impress upon the people, your key to survival, to immortality, so you don't suffer the fate of every other nation and go out of existence at a certain point in time, as did the Romans and the Greeks and the Persians and the Medians and the Egyptian empires, etc. If you want to somehow continue eternally, then you're going to have to appreciate what the guidebook I gave you and the rules you have to follow. You break those rules and all hell breaks out. All hell breaks loose and anything can happen. You follow the rules and you'll be protected. I want, and it's interesting that the rabbis do try to smooth this over somewhat because they realize how caustic it is. I want to tell you a story. This is a story that, yes, thank you, Yehudit. Hakarat HaTov, about appreciating, saying brachot, which is a form of Hakarat HaTov, and realizing that God gives us everything we have. That's why we have so many blessings. I want to tell you a story that was told to me by Rabbi Riskin, who, as many of you know, I'm very close with him. He's an amazing, amazing person. And this is a story. I'm going to tell you a story within a story because I'm a great believer. You know, the BKOA tells us that if you say something in someone's name and give them credit, mevi geula la'olam, you bring redemption to the world. It's a form of appreciating others and sharing basically sharing the stage with others. And this is a story that some of you may have heard, but you may not know that it's a fantastic story, that it was originated by Rabbi Riskin. And I'm going to come back to that when I tell you a story within the story. In any case, Rabbi Riskin tells a story when he was young, prior to his bar mitzvah, when he was living in New York, and he decided that he grew up in Brooklyn, and he decided he wanted to go to the shul, to a Hasidic shul of the Klausenberger Rebbe, Rav Halberstam. Now, he was a very famous individual. The Klausenberger Rebbe had lost his wife and 11 children in the Holocaust and had survived and had come to New York. And there are many stories told about him. I mean, I don't have time to go into all of them, but he was there. He was the leader in the DP, the displaced persons camp, of the Jews who had survived the war. And he had charged himself, although he suffered so much and lost so much, to bring these people back to a sense of connection to Hashem and out of their depression or rejection of God. There's famous stories about him that he stood up and he said, you know, our al-chet is going to be different this year. He said to God, I'm not going to say al-chet, you know, for the times that, you know, I stole. What was there to steal? I'm in a death camp. I'm not going to say al-chet, you know, for the times that I didn't pray enough to you. Who had a siddur to pray? You don't think we prayed our hearts out in a death camp? And famously, he was the one who, after liberation, when asked, what do you people need? He said, bring in lulav and etrog for everybody. I want to return the people to a sense of active keeping of the mitzvot. That will be what you can do for us to restore our position as Jews who follow the mitzvot. In any case, he came to New York and he established a Hasidic community in the Bedford-Stuyvesant area of Brooklyn, said Rabbi Riskin. And Rabbi Riskin one summer came to the shul there. It happened to be the Shabbat of Tavo. And, you know, he wanted to see how the people daven, and they're very energetic. And, you know, he felt a little bit out of place. He didn't have any kind of, you know, the Hasidic dress. But at any rate, they came to the Torah reading. Now, as you might know, because the tochacha, the curses of Ki Tavo, are so dramatic and so graphic, most shuls have accustomed to read them quickly and quietly. Indeed, they often will only call the BKOA up for the aliyah and not anybody else, because people would say, it's not lucky for me to have that aliyah. So they usually give it to the BKOA who's reading it anyway. In any case, Rabbi Rutstein already knew, as he's a youngster then, but he knew that you read it quickly and quietly, almost so that nobody can hear it, in an undertone. And as they began to read the Kriyah, the Torah reading, quietly, the Klausenberger Rebbe, who's at the front of the shul, bangs on his stender and he yells out, Hecher, Hecher, in Yiddish, which means louder. When we say we have a Hecher Kedusha, that means a loud Kedusha. You know that expression. And they thought they misheard him. So they continued quietly. Again, he banged. He said, I told you, in Yiddish, I told you to read it louder. Chagazukt Hecher. And they kind of looked at him, and he looked back at them. The Torah reading stopped, and he said in this dramatic way, he said to the shul, he said, no, you're going to read this out loud. Every single pasuk. We don't have anything to fear anymore, that God will bring these curses on us. We have already experienced through the Holocaust, in the Shoah, every possible curse that's mentioned in this Parsha. Nothing worse could ever be done to us. And therefore, I want you to read it loud to say to God, Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the Universe, we have suffered every one of these curses, every klala. Now it's time to bring the brachot, bring the blessings, enough of the curses. And the BKOA, the reader, read out loud. The people were crying hysterically when they heard this dramatic from a man who lost everything. And as you might know from the story, that the Klausenberger Rebbe, and as Rabbi Rutstein tells, when he got up to give his drasha, he said, although he had come to Brooklyn, Chevra, it's time to go home. And Brooklyn is not our home. Those of you who will follow me, I am moving to Israel. He became the leader of this great community in Netanya, Kiryat Sanz, and he dedicated his life to building Laniado Hospital, where many, many people would be helped. And to this day, it continues. He, of course, is no longer alive, but it continues that tradition. So he saw these klalot, the tochacha, as a way of instilling fear. But he told the people, in Israel, we'll have tshuva me ahava, from love, when we see the amazing miracles that God will do for us, which of course came true in his lifetime and certainly in ours. And this prediction that here in our pasuk, that when we follow Hashem, 7 armies will attack you and you will chase them away. This is a literal description of what happened in 1948 when we were attacked by 7 Arab armies, and we repelled them, and we were able to establish the state of Israel. I mentioned to you that this idea of always quoting somebody, and just as a story within a story, if you heard this story before but you didn't know where it came from, it was Rabbi Rutstein. But it could be that sometimes, unfortunately, people leave out certain things. I once heard, and another fantastic story, I won't say it at length, but it's a story about a boy in the yeshiva of the Chafetz Chaim, Yisrael Meir HaKohen, who was found to have violated, he was smoking on Shabbat, and they wanted to throw him out of the yeshiva. The Chafetz Chaim came to meet with him, and somehow the Chafetz Chaim forgave him and turned his life around and said something to him. And as the story goes, nobody knew what was said to him until one day there was a rabbi telling the story and said, I wish I could learn what happened to that boy and what the Chafetz Chaim said to him to turn him around. And the rabbi was giving a talk in Miami. And a man, an elderly man, rose up and said, I can tell you what the Chafetz Chaim said. I was that boy. And he recounted what the Chafetz Chaim had said to him and basically took his hand and repeated over and over the word Shabbos with tears streaming down his face to say, Shabbos is the most important gift that God has given us. You can't forsake it. Well, I tell this to you because I read about this story and it left out the name of the rabbi who gave that talk in Miami, and that was Rabbi Riskin. And I called that institution that sent out the story, and I said to them, do you know that the rabbi who gave that talk in Miami was Rabbi Riskin? And kind of hesitatingly, the person said, yes, but it's not politically correct in my institution to mention Rabbi Riskin. And as you might imagine, I gave him as we would say back in Texas, a verbal whooping like you cannot believe. How dare you? What you did, you brought destruction, not geula, to the world, because you used the story, but you purposely didn't mention the name. There are a lot of great stories that Rabbi Riskin tells, but you know, this is part of the unity of Am Yisrael, that we recognize the good in everybody else and we give credit to other people, even if they're not necessarily espousing our political values. That doesn't prevent us from connecting to everyone. So this, in closing, this Parsha is so crucial before Rosh Hashanah and the Yamim Noraim, the days of awe and fear. Perhaps we'll change that sometime to the Yamim, Ahuvim, to the days of love, to tell us that one way or another, we're going to have to live up to our Jewish and spiritual responsibilities. Moshe is telling us. We boarded that plane of Jewish history, which took off at Har Sinai, and it's not landing till we finish the job and come to the final geula. So you're on the trip, you're on the voyage and the journey. And says Moshe, there are two ways to approach it. The first is, at the very least, to be in awe and to appreciate that God is the creator. He controls life and death. He has the power to punish and to reward. But the other way is to come on your own, of your own conclusion and of your own inspiration, to understand that this is our destiny and this is our lifestyle. And we have to embrace it out of love, out of hakarat tov, out of joy, ivdu et Hashem b'simcha. And that's why we interject this strange pasuk that God is hinting to us. Of course, the real reason, the technical reason why you're perhaps experiencing these punishments is because you didn't follow the mitzvot. But the deeper, more important reason is that you didn't grasp the greatness and the beauty of Yiddishkeit, of Judaism, that brings joy and blessing wherever you go. And you miss the main message. And that's what you have to try to recapture. And that is really the challenge that we face every year when we approach Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, to have the right mindset and that kind of hakarat tov by appreciating what Hashem does for us each and every day. So I'm going to stop, and if anybody has a comment or a question, by all means, unmute yourself and feel free to say whatever you want. It's an open forum, but I'm done. So if anybody wants to say something, Bakasha.
Yashikoyach. There is a chat, and there's a question in the chat.
Okay, let's see the question in the chat. We have hakarat tov so built into the system before and after meals, before bed, when waking up. Why is it so hard for people to have hakarat tov, an appreciation of the good which God does for us? I think because human nature, as the Torah tells us, sometimes causes people to say, that it was my own doing and my own, the strength of my own hands that accomplished this. And we have to fight that impulse, because we know that everything comes from Hashem. We are the partners, and we have to give ourselves, a pat on the back, but within limits. And we do have to appreciate, that central behind all of the brachot we have comes from Hashem, even though we have a part to play as well. Okay. If nobody else has anything to add or question. Chats. Yes, Tommy?
I think there's 2 more chats.
There's 2 more chats. I didn't see 2 more chats.
No. No, it's just...
No, we just said hakarat tov. That's appreciation of everything that Hashem does. And as I always say, if nobody has any questions or comments, then I assume you agree with everything I said. So I appreciate you being here. Bezrat Hashem, we will try to meet next week as well at 6 p.m. Thanks again to Yossi for both hosting and also recording. So there will be a record of it, or recording of it, if you want to get that as well. As to why only a half hour, brevity is the key to happy congregants. So as I was taught in rabbinical school, no short sermon is entirely without merit. You can chew on that, and God willing, we'll see you again next time. Everybody be healthy. Don't forget that unfortunately, Corona is spiking. We now, unfortunately, have the highest per capita rate of infection of any country on earth. And that's not a good thing. And watch yourself, as my friend Marshall tells me, every step of the way. Be careful where you go, what you do, and always err on the side of caution. And Be'ezrat Hashem, if we all cooperate, those numbers will go down, and we will see the bracha and not the klala. So to everybody, Shabbat Shalom. And
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you so much.